Today's video is meant for beginners. So if you've never played chess before, I'm going to teach you how to play in less than 10 minutes. So let's get started. First thing you need to know is that white always moves first. And the pieces are already set up in the starting position. Let's quickly look at the names of the pieces. The ones here in the front, they are the pawns, and each side will have 8 pawns. And then the pieces in the corners, they are called rooks. Next to the rooks, we have knights. And next to the knights, we have bishops. And then, as you probably guessed it, in the center, we have the queen and the king. Notice that white's queen always starts on the light square, whereas black's queen always starts on the dark square. Now let's see how the pieces move. The pawns can only move forward. This is very important to understand. They can never move backwards. And from the starting position, the pawns can move 1 or 2 squares. But after you move them, they can only go 1 step at a time. So, for example, if you decide you're going to play e3, and you can see the board coordinates here, this is the e file, and over here where the mouse is pointing, there's the 3. That's how you name the squares. So this would be e3. If you play e3 and black will go here, this is called E5. It's on the E file, and you can see the 5 there, so we call it E5. Not 5E, by the way. Like in school classes, they put the number first in the letter, but for chess board coordinates, you first put the letter and then the number. Now, you cannot push this pawn 2 squares anymore. You can only do it from the start. So if you want to push a pawn 2 squares, you've got to do it on the first move. You can't save the double square move for later on. The next piece we're going to look at is the knight. It's a very special piece. It's the only piece that can jump. Now, it looks like a horse, but it's not called a horse, it's a knight. And how does a knight move? Well, it moves in an L or a 7 shape, depending on how you want to imagine this. And it's always 2 plus 1 or 1 plus 2. So it can go in another 7 shape, like that. You can also go like that. So there are 3 moves here for the knight. But important in chess is we want to try to attack these 4 squares in the first stage of the game, which is called the opening. So the best square for the knight here would be to go to F3. Notice again, it's the F file. These are called files, and it's on the 3rd rank. These are called ranks, so that's called F3. The next piece we're going to look at will be the bishop. Now, how does a bishop move? Well, a bishop moves only diagonally. So it can only move like this. But it can go as far as you want to, as long as it's not blocked by another piece. Cannot jump like knights, but it can move a long distance. You can also move it 1 square at a time if you want to. It really depends where would be the best square. So let's get this bishop out, and we put it there on. See if you can work out the name of this square. It's on the C file, and it's on the 5th rank. So what are we going to call this? We said C5. That is correct. So the bishop goes to C5. Now, let's get white's bishop out as well. So the bishop here, let's put it on this square. What's the name of that square? Well, if you said C4, that is correct. It's on the C file and the 4th rank. The next piece we're going to look at how it moves is the king. That's the most important piece on the chessboard. Not the most powerful, but it's the most important. The queen is the most powerful. So the king can move one square at a time in any direction, but it cannot jump over pieces. So right now it can't go to those squares, but it can move diagonally. So if the pawns were not there, it would have been able to go there. But there's also one special move for the king. It's called castling. So how does castling work? Well, the king will move 2 squares and the rook will jump over the king and lands next to it. You can only do it once in the game and you cannot undo it. We'll get to that in a minute, but now another important thing to know is that you can't move twice in a row. So you play as white, then black plays, then white plays, then black plays. So you have to take turns. You can never ever move twice in a row. So let's get now to the most powerful piece, that is the queen. So it's black's turn here. Now the queen can move diagonally like the bishop, can also move backwards. By the way, the bishop can also move back. All the pieces can go back past the pawns. But the queen can also move left or right, or it can move forward in a straight line. It must always go straight, whether it's left or right or forward or diagonally. But of course here it is again blocked by its own pieces. So in this case, the queen can only move diagonally. And you can also just move the queen 1 square if you want to. You don't have to move it a long distance. Putting it here on h4 would be a bad move, because then the knight will just take that queen for nothing. That would be a very bad idea to give away your queen for nothing. So maybe you put the queen there. What's the name of the square? Well, if you said E7, that is correct. Now we get back to white. And if white wants to castle here, well, the king will move 2 squares and the rook will land next to it. You cannot undo this move. Well, you can't undo any move, but sometimes you can move a piece back to where it came from. You cannot uncastle the king. That is against the rules. So now we know how the king moves, the queen, the pawn, the knight, and the bishop. But what about the rook? Well, the rook can move as far as it wants to, forward, left, right, as long as it's not blocked by another piece. Again, it cannot jump. The only piece that can jump is a knight. So white's rook right now can only move to E1. But it's not white's turn. So white can only do that after black moved. So let's get a knight out for black. Remember, the knight moves is like 2 + 1. And you want to attack one of these center squares. If possible, you want to attack more than one. So if you go knight F6, that will be attacking 2 of the center squares. Now it's white's turn, and if he wants to, he can now move his rook. The rook can go to E1. So these are not necessarily the very best moves. It just gives you an idea of how the pieces can move. There's one more move I need to show you. So we'll go back to the starting position. This move is called en passant. So if a pawn moves, let's say to E4, let's say black goes C5, and now white pushes again. Remember, after the first move, you can only go ahead 1 square. Now, before I get to en passant, let me show you how a pawn captures. Pawn is a bit interesting because it captures diagonally. It cannot capture forward. So if black goes E6, then white can't take. But if black goes d6, then the pawn can take because they capture diagonally. And of course, black can recapture with a pawn if he wants to, or we can recapture with the queen. He doesn't have to recapture. This is something else that's important to know. You don't have to recapture, but most of the time it's a good idea to do so. Now, here comes the special move. This is called en passant. If black now moves 2 squares past your pawn that's already on black's side, you can still take it as if he played d6. So if he goes in one move from d7 to d5, wham, you can take it. But you've got to do it on your next turn. For example, if you decide, I'm going to get my knight out to defend the pawn, if black now gets his knight out as well, you can't now say, well, maybe I want to take en passant after all. That's not allowed. En passant has to be played on your very next turn. But for other regular captures, you can always change your mind. So if he goes d6, attacking you, and you say, well, I want to defend that, and now he attacks you again, now you can change your mind and say, well, you know, I want to take that pawn after all, because this is just a regular capture. It's not an en passant capture. So that's how the pieces move. Now, the most important piece, like I said, is the king. And how do you win a game of chess? Well, you win a game of chess by checkmating the king. I'm going to set up a new position here to show you an example of a checkmate. Now, of course, if you want to know what checkmate is, you need to know, first of all, what check is. So let's say we have kings like this, and we also give black a rook. Now, checking simply means you are attacking the king. Checkmate means the king is under attack and there's nothing you can do to get out of check. That is checkmate. So if black plays now rook g8, that will be checkmate, because black's king are attacking those squares. The rook is attacking the king and is also covering all the squares on the 8th rank. So the king cannot go anywhere and it is game over. Sometimes you can block a check. So we look at that next. So for example, if there was, let's say there was a bishop here, now if black checks, white can still get out of check by blocking. Other times, it is possible to take the piece that is checking you. So let's say this position, the bishop now is covering that square. So checking here, very bad idea, because you lose the rook. So checking is not always a smart move. And then another way to get out of check is if you can move the king. So if we again have a rook here and the rook checks, now notice this f7 square is unguarded, so the king can move to that square. The last thing I'm going to show, perhaps the most complicated, is stalemate. Now, what does that mean? It means it is your move, but you have nowhere to go. So if it's white's move here, notice the rook there is attacking the b7 and the b8 square, and the king there is attacking the a7 square. It's white's turn, but white can't move anywhere. That's stalemate, and the game is a draw. So when you're winning, stalemate is something you try and avoid. Now, this is basically chess in a nutshell, I've shown you all the rules and the main idea of the game.